Aristotle is one of the most important thinkers in history. His ideas shape science, philosophy, politics, and even the way we think. Born over 2,000 years ago in ancient Greece, his influence can still be seen in modern education, ethics, and logic. He was a student of Plato, a teacher of Alexander the Great, and a man who changed philosophy forever. He studied everything from nature, logic, the human mind, and even how people should live their lives. His works laid the foundation for many subjects today. But who exactly was Aristotle, and why do his ideas still matter? Well, let's explore his life, his philosophy, and how Aristotle changed the world. Aristotle was born in 384 BC in the city of Stagira in northern Greece. His father, Nicomachus, was a physician who worked for the royal family of Macedonia. This gave Aristotle early exposure to science and medicine, which would later influence his work. However, his parents died when he was very young, and so he was raised by a guardian. At around 18 years of age, Aristotle moved to Athens, the center of learning in the ancient world. He joined Plato's academy, yes, the other famous Greek philosopher, where he studied for about 20 years. During this time, he absorbed Plato's teachings, but also developed some of his own ideas. While Plato believed in ideal forms, Aristotle was more interested in studying the real world and understanding how things actually worked. This difference in thinking would shape Aristotle's entire philosophy going forwards. Then, after Plato's death, Aristotle left Athens and travelled around Greece and Asia Minor. During these years, he gathered knowledge on a wide range of subjects, from biology to politics, and eventually he was invited to Macedonia to tutor a young prince, Alexander. Aristotle taught him philosophy and science, helping to shape one of history's most famous conquerors. Years later, Aristotle returned to Athens and founded his own school, the Lyceum. Here, he taught students and wrote many of his famous works. Unlike Plato's academy, which focused on abstract ideas, Aristotle instead emphasized observation and practical study. Aristotle and his students collected information about plants, animals, politics, and ethics, creating a system of knowledge that would influence the world for centuries. Aristotle's philosophy covered many areas of knowledge, but one of his most important contributions was in theoretical philosophy. This included logic, metaphysics, and epistemology, the study of knowledge. He developed a system of logic that is still used today, known as syllogism. This was a method of reasoning where a conclusion is drawn from two given statements. For example, if all men are mortal, and Socrates is a man, then Socrates must be mortal. This logical structure helped shape scientific and philosophical thinking for centuries. In metaphysics, Aristotle studied the nature of reality. He rejected Plato's idea of perfect forms existing in another world and argued instead that everything we see and experience is real. He believed that everything in the world has a purpose or a final cause, which helps explain why it exists. This idea would become a key part of his philosophy. Aristotle also explored how we gain knowledge. He believed that through experience and observation, rather than through pure reason alone, he argued that by carefully studying the world, we can discover patterns and truths about how things work. This approach laid the foundation for the scientific method, which would be developed much later. Aristotle's work in natural philosophy focused on the physical world and how it operates. He studied biology, physics, and the natural sciences, trying to explain how living things function and how the universe is structured. Unlike many thinkers of his time, Aristotle believed in careful observation and classification. He studied animals and plants, grouping them into categories based on their characteristics. This made him one of the first people to create a system for classifying living things, a method that influenced biology for centuries. In physics, Aristotle believed that everything in nature had a purpose and followed natural laws. He thought the universe was made up of four main elements: earth, water, air, and fire. He also introduced the idea that objects naturally move towards their proper place, which he used to explain why heavy things fall and fire rises. While some of his ideas were later proven wrong, they influenced the way physicists thought about the world. Aristotle also studied the stars and planets. He believed that Earth was at the center of the universe and that everything moved around it in perfect circles. This idea, known as the geocentric model, was widely accepted for centuries until it was eventually replaced by the heliocentric model, where the sun is at the center. Aristotle also focused on practical philosophy, which was about how people should live their lives and how societies should be organized. His two main areas of practical philosophy were ethics and politics. In ethics, Aristotle believed that the goal of human life was to achieve happiness. He argued that happiness comes from living a life of virtue, which means developing good habits and making wise choices. He introduced the idea of the golden mean, which means finding a balance between extremes. For example, courage is a balance between being too reckless and too fearful. In politics, Aristotle studied different types of governments and wrote about how they worked. He believed that the best government was one that worked for the good of the people, not just a small group. He classified governments into three main types: monarchy, aristocracy, and polity. He warned that each type of government could become corrupt if the leaders acted selfishly. Aristotle's influence did not end with his death as well. His ideas shaped philosophy, science, and politics for many centuries. Many later thinkers built on his work, and his teachings became a foundation for Western thought. In the Middle Ages, for example, Aristotle's writings were studied in schools in both the Islamic world and Europe. Muslim philosophers such as Avicenna and Averroes preserved and expanded on his ideas, helping to bring them back to Europe during the Renaissance. Christian thinkers like Thomas Aquinas combined Aristotle's philosophy with his religious teachings, shaping medieval thought. During the Renaissance and Enlightenment periods, scientists and philosophers began to challenge some of Aristotle's ideas, but they still relied on his methods of logical reasoning and careful observation. As new discoveries were being made, especially in astronomy and physics, Aristotle's explanations of the natural world were questioned. One major example of this is the work of Galileo. Aristotle had taught that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones, but Galileo tested this idea by dropping objects from the Leaning Tower of Pisa. He found that all objects, regardless of weight, fall at the same rate in a vacuum. Galileo also used telescopes to study the stars and provided evidence that contradicted Aristotle's belief in an Earth-centered universe. So that was Aristotle, the great philosopher. His legacy is enormous. His search for knowledge and his systematic way of thinking inspired countless philosophers, scientists, and leaders. More than 2,000 years after his death, his ideas continue to shape the world, making him one of the most important thinkers in history. And so, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.